Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. Today we are welcoming Emma Henderson, who up until 2020 was one of fewer than 500 female airline captains in the whole entire world, which is a pretty big thing, and is now a world-renowned
Let's go with that.
award-winning speaker with an MBE to her name as well for all her work. And aviation ambassador, and she's going to talk to you about Project Wingman, a charity she founded during the pandemic, and tell us a little bit about the story of Project Wingman and where it is today. So if you could welcome Emma. And
thank you. Thank you. I don't know if I'm world renowned yet, but who knows? Over to you, Adam, on that. No pressure. So I am going to tell you about Project Wingman, but before I do that, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my journey into aviation in the first place, because otherwise the Wingman story doesn't make quite as much sense. Oh, that's not working now. There we go. Thank you. So the story of how the little girl on the left turned into the much cooler person on the right-hand side of the screen. I think much cooler anyway. It started in 1983 when I went to Stansted and saw Space Shuttle Enterprise land, which was very exciting. My mum and dad used to take us on these educational trips, I think, because they thought it would stop us from fighting, but of course it just transferred the fight to the back of the car. So I looked up at that and thought, I want to fly one of those. And I was talking about the Space Shuttle, not the 747. But I didn't know how to become an astronaut, because everything I knew about the world was in an encyclopedia about that thick called the Encyclopedia of the World. We didn't have the internet, as you all know. I didn't even know there was an Air Cadets in my hometown. When I was 18, my parents bought me a flying lesson for my 18th birthday, which I loved so much. That was at Earl's Colne. I grew up in Essex. And I loved it so much that I landed and said to my dad, that's brilliant. I want to become a pilot. And he said, that's brilliant. You need to learn to earn the money to pay for your lessons. And I worked on the Tesco's checkouts, and that was a Saturday job. And I thought, I'm never going to be able to afford to do that. So I changed my plan and I went off to university, and I found this big banner at Freshers Week saying, learn to fly for free. So I thought, I'll go and do that. Now, can you all see numbers in there? That's really good, because that means none of you are colourblind. I can't see any numbers in there. And that was the first hurdle, because I went down to, I think you're all lying. I think that's just like weird coloured dots. I'm like, what do you mean there's numbers in there? So I heard that, so the University Air Squadron that was recruiting, and I went down to RAF Finningley for an interview, and then a medical. It didn't occur to me I'd have to have a medical. So I didn't even take my glasses. I'm short-sighted as well. And I think because it was the second year that they'd allowed women into the Air Force to fly, I think that's why I kind of got away with it, because they gave me aircrew specs, and that's when I found out I was colourblind. And they sent me off to do a lantern test, which I managed to pass. So I spent the next 2 years flying around the skies of Yorkshire. I'm Officer Cadet Priest down here. That was my maiden name. And the idea then was that I was going to join the Air Force and become a Harrier pilot, because I got Harrier pilot boots because my feet were too small for the black boots that everyone else had. So there was a sign, I must need to be a Harrier pilot. But actually, as often happens, boys get in the way. So although I did spend 2 years learning to fly in a Bulldog, that is actually me, massive overkill on a University Air Squadron, flying a single engine propeller plane around in a full bone dome and flying suit, but that's what we had to do. And that was my new plan. I'll join the Air Force, I'll become a fast jet pilot. Of course, I'm going to do that. So 11 days after I graduated, I found myself walking down the aisle of my local church, getting married to the man who has now been my husband for 30 years in July. And my plan changed again, because he was posted to Kinloss on the Nimrod. And I wasn't going to spend the first 3 years of our marriage being at Cranwell and all over the country away from him. So I didn't join the Air Force. I got married, and I thought that I wasn't going to fly again, ever again. We decided to have children, built a house, because the sensible thing to do when you're in the middle of having children is build a house, isn't it? And we decided to settle at Kinloss forever. And as usual, our plans kind of changed, because a year after we moved into that house, we moved into a new house in Auckland, New Zealand, on a maritime exchange that hadn't existed when we had built the house originally. So we moved 12,000 miles around the world with our 3 tiny children. And I thought, what on earth is going on? What's the plan here? My brother lived in New Zealand at the time, so it was nice to have the time with him. But it just proves that there is no right way round to do life. So I then, it was actually Jim's idea that I started flying again. He said, I was a healthy 20 a day Marlboro Light smoker, drinker, didn't run, had 3 children, pretty unfit. And Jim said, if you stop smoking, the money you save in pounds will pay in dollars for you to do your licenses. And I thought, okay. He said, but you've got to stop smoking for 6 weeks. I was like, ooh, okay. And so I did that, took up running and triathlons to lose some weight, because I thought if I give up smoking, I'm going to get bigger, and took up flying. And I came back. I spent the next 3 years flying around New Zealand. And one of the most amazing people that I met while I was doing that, through my father-in-law, who was on 617 Squadron, he flew out and said, I want you to fly me down to Tauranga to go and meet this guy I know. And this guy he knew was Les Munro, who was the last remaining original Dam Busters pilot. And he and I became friends. And I met him for lunch this particular day. He'd been to the gym and he'd left his girlfriend at home so that he could come and meet us for lunch. He had a granddaughter called Emma, who was also a pilot, and he and I struck up this great friendship. And he would come and see us when he gave talks in the UK. He'd always come and see us and take us out for dinner. And he's sadly no longer with us, but he was a fantastic man and huge champion of women flying. And he followed my career with interest as I flew around. That's the Sky Tower in downtown Auckland, which we were allowed to fly really close to then. You're not now, because somebody tried to fly into it. And I came back as a fully qualified commercial pilot 3.5 years later. My children had grown. I literally would drop them off at school and nursery, and then come back, do a flying lesson, and then go pick them up again when I landed. And it mostly worked out. When I came back, I couldn't get a job. I had to convert all my licenses to the Joint Aviation Authority, as it was then. It's now obviously EASA. And I became an instructor initially at Booker in High Wycombe. And then I moved up to Kinloss, and then finally became chief flying instructor at Inverness. And that was flying down Loch Ness one day. That's the runway at Plockton. The green shed on the right-hand side is the hangar, and I know where the biscuits are kept, and I know the code to get into the biscuit cupboard. So I used to like going into Plockton. And eventually I found myself in the right place at the right time to get the job that I had always wanted when I'd first started on any flying journey. EasyJet launched in 1995, as many of you probably know, from Luton. The first route was to Glasgow and the second route was to Aberdeen. And it opened up that corner of Scotland to those of us who had been posted there further away than Germany, but with no LOA or rates to get back. So I always said to Jim, if I do ever fly again, I want to fly for this lot. They seem quite cool. And I found myself in the right place at the right time in 2009, actually. I first went to EasyJet, but they didn't have enough instructors to train us onto the line through the summer. So they sent us all away, and we came back in 2010. And that just proves that my plan for life might have been a straight line. And what really happens is the bottom picture there. 2010 was a pretty tricky year for me, as I was learning my craft in the right-hand seat of my aircraft. I faced a number of my own challenges, the first of which was my brother, who lived in New Zealand. He was in the New Zealand Police Force. That's him standing by his police car there. He had a horrific motorbike accident, which he only just survived. That was him when they had started to try and patch him up. He is still alive. He's paralysed from the waist down now, and he went on to become actually world champion outrigger canoe racer in Tahiti in 2018. He's a bit of a show off. But he's done very well. But that happened in 2010, just as I was starting my training into EasyJet. And there he is with his lei round his neck. Then, if you remember, Eyjafjallajökull, spent ages learning how to pronounce that, erupted in Iceland and closed European airspace. And there was talk that they were going to lay people off, and I was last in. So I thought, well, I'm obviously going to be first out. Thankfully, that didn't happen. My husband, by this time, up at Kinloss, it still was at the time, he was diagnosed with diabetes, and that threatened our environment because we didn't know if he was going to be medically discharged from the Air Force. So I didn't know if we were going to be able to even keep our house at the time. And then my parents' house one night caught fire. I'd gone to Alicante for the night, came back at 2 a.m, shut my bedroom door so that mum didn't wake me up in the morning with her hoovering outside my bed. Oh, sorry, darling, did I disturb you? Yes, you did. But on this occasion, it was the smell that woke me up. And I thought I could smell burning plastic. And when I opened the door of my bedroom, which was here, I couldn't see their bedroom door, which was there because of smoke. And we did all get out. So we spent the next 9 months living in a hotel, but it was pretty traumatic. And then just to cap the year off, in the Strategic Defence Review, they scrapped the Nimrod, closed the Kinloss and posted us south just as we put our children into boarding school at Gordonston, which is next door to Lossiemouth, and promised that mummy and daddy would be there forever. So it was a pretty challenging year, given that that was my first year also learning how to fly an Airbus. Made into razor blades. Very sad day for those of us that were Kipper fleet in the back in the day. And just because I wasn't in the Air Force, it doesn't mean I didn't love them any less. But I did end up with this as my office. I think it's one of the coolest offices in the world. I'm sorry to anybody that's a Boeing fan, but really, if it's not Airbus, why would you bother? Notwithstanding the fact I know that Leonardo obviously make aircraft as well. But that was my office. And then we moved to Bushey. And we were living in RAF Halton at the time. We moved down to Bushey. And I had contracted an illness that we couldn't explain. I had 6 months off work and I kind of arrived in Bushey a bit discombobulated. And this is really relevant to the Project Wingman story because my illness was diagnosed and cured by a fantastic neurosurgeon or neurologist at Frimley Park Hospital. And I had access to him because at RAF Halton, they saw dependents as well as serving personnel. So I kind of got in the back door at Frimley Park, which is half military and half NHS. And he basically saved my life. But I turned up at Bushey and I didn't have any, my children were at boarding school. I couldn't really walk. I was a pilot that wasn't flying. I was a mummy with no children. I didn't really know who I was. And I found these people. And this is the North London Military Wives Choir. And they became my people for the next 2 years. And we had the best fun ever with these people. We lost people, we gained people. We went through highs and lows together. And these photos were taken at Wembley Stadium when we sang the national anthem live on stage to a fully packed arena at an NFL football game. And of all those ladies, everybody walked out onto stage going, I'm really nervous. I don't want to do this. One person walked out on stage going, this is my moment. Hello, Wembley. That was me. So they were absolutely fantastic. And, surrounding yourself with a team of people is always how you make these things work, including charities. The sim was a huge part of my world. Obviously, I spent a lot of time in the simulator learning how to deal with failures. But actually, after I had my illness, I rushed back into the command process too quickly. And as a result of that, I ended up failing my command, after which my children decided that the best way to respond to that when I had driven home at 3 o'clock in the morning in floods of tears was to come into the room the next day and say, Mummy, we're really, really sorry that you failed your command. Can we get a puppy? And they showed me this thing wrapped up in a white towel and said, look, we found one on Gumtree or something. I was like, no good dog ever comes from Gumtree. And I said, no. We said no more dogs until I've become a captain. They said, no, you didn't. You said no more dogs until you finished your command. And Daddy said, you've now finished your command. And you didn't say you had to pass. So we went and got Poppy, who's now an old lady and not quite as cute as that. But yeah, we ended up with the dog. It was a real struggle for me when I failed command because everybody knew I'd gone away to do the command process. And I came back to Luton, where I was based at the time. They all knew I'd gone, and I came back and they were congratulating me and saying, well done, Captain. I was like, nope, I didn't make it. I couldn't quite afford me yet. And I carried this around with me in my bag all the time. The devil whispered in my ear, and you're not strong enough to withstand the storm. And I whispered back, I am the storm. And the day I passed my command was at Luton. And the day I rolled onto stand with the training captain sitting behind me saying, congratulations, Captain Henderson, you have passed your line check, was a really emotional day for me and for him because he had been a friend from Stansted days. So that was fantastic. And I went on to learn that the challenges we face are there to refine you and not define you, which I think is a really important thing because actually now nobody remembers me as the captain that failed their command. That's not how I'm known. But at the time, it felt like it was the biggest thing ever. And I actually seriously considered stopping flying as a result. But I then spent the next few years flying around Europe as a captain of my own ship, having a lot of fun on the way. And we used to raise a lot of money for cancer twice a year. There's a cancer awareness campaign, and we had a huge amount of fun. And although there are a small number of female airline captains in the world, I know quite a lot of them because some of them were my friends at EasyJet. And then the company asked me to join, to be part of an ITV documentary called Inside the Cockpit. And I agreed because the first series had been so terrible, and I really wanted to make sure that people understood that we're there to do a good job and that we're professional. The first series was really appalling. And I was part of that. And that was really what gave me the platform for what I didn't know I was going to need to do next. So on the 16th of March, which is this Sunday, so 5 years ago on Sunday, I flew back from Luxembourg. This is runway 26 left at Gatwick. And as I flew into Gatwick, I thought, what's coming is bad. I could tell that we thought that 2020 was going to be the year for aviation. We rode in on the crest of a wave. And of course, it came crashing around down our ears. And this was the last time I flew into Gatwick as a commercial pilot, not knowing that as I packed up my aircraft for the night and walked down the steps to check back and make sure it was all okay, that it was the last time I'd ever operate commercially for the airline I loved and the career that I had worked hard to achieve. And I hope you like the cheesiness of this, because the sun literally set on my career. And what I could have done is gone home and just read books in the garden like everyone else. Well, not everybody else, but a lot of my friends just went home and read books and enjoyed the sunshine. But I couldn't do that, could I? Because I'd been a peer support mentor at EasyJet, and I spoke to the clinical psychologist who had overseen that programme and still does. And I said, look, I think that there's a way that we can support NHS staff. We knew that they were facing their biggest challenge yet, but so were we. And he put me in touch with a BA captain that was thinking along the same lines. And 3 weeks after the 30-minute conversation we had, we opened our first wellbeing lounge at the Whittington Hospital in North East London. And our idea was simple. It was just give us a room that is big enough to practice social distancing, which was all we had to do at the time, because at the time, COVID wasn't dangerous enough for masks. And we went into hospitals and just said, come and sit down, we'll make you a cup of tea, just come out of your stressful environment and we'll look after you. And Project Wingman was born. And because I had been on the telly and people knew who I was, I put out this call to aircrew everywhere and said, would you like to come and help us? And 750 people responded in the first 3 days. And by the summer of 2020, we had 6,500 crew across the country going into lounges and providing wellbeing support to frontline NHS staff all over the country, from Elgin, near where I live, down to Barnstaple in Devon. We had a lounge in Belfast, across to East Anglia, and everywhere in between. We had a lot of lounges in London. We've been to St Albans and Luton and Dunstable. We had lounges as well. I even did a stint in a lounge in Edinburgh in July of 2020. That was the first time I had left Murray for several months because I was busy kind of, being the puppet master. And I went down to Edinburgh for the last stint in this lounge. And when we finished, there's an atrium in the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary that's then got a long corridor out to the car park. And as we left, staff lined the corridor and clapped as we left. And it was so emotional. It even chokes me up a bit now, even thinking about how much it meant to people, the fact that we'd been there. And it was really important that we were there to listen to people. There was a story one day when somebody had come into the lounge and said, do you know when you're going to start flying again? And the answer was, well, no, we don't. We're really sorry. And the person who asked the question burst into tears and said, I'm from South Africa. My mother died last night. I don't know when or if I'm going to get home for the funeral. And we couldn't change that situation for them. But one of our volunteers was able to go and sit down next to them while they worked through the feelings they were going through before they went back to work to save people's lives. And there was another time when a friend of ours, an Air Force friend who'd done his nav training with my husband actually, called up and said, my daughter's a junior doctor in Birmingham and she's been in tears on the phone every day when she's come home. And today she wasn't. And I asked what the difference was. And she said, I went into this cool lounge and they just made me drinks and looked after me and it felt brilliant. And he said, I think that's Emma Henderson's lounge. I was like, no, it's not. Well, it's not mine. It's my idea, but it's the 6,500 other people that are doing all the work. So it had a massive, massive impact. So much so that when I was speaking to this morning at a National Guardian's Office panel for the NHS, there were 300 people there. And when I introduced myself and said I founded a charity called Project Wingman, there was a gasp around the room as people realised that I was the person that had set up the charity that had benefited them so much. And so many of them came and said thank you, which was a real privilege to be able to say to them, thank you for coming into our lounges and for everything you've done for us. As 2020 moved on, so did the airlines and so did other people. And hospitals needed their spaces back and crew went back to work. So we needed to find a way to become sustainable. So in the middle of a pandemic, when we kept going in and out of lockdown and all the charities were struggling for money, we became a charity in a record 3 weeks, thanks to Douglas Ross, our MP, who really advocated for us. But in that time, we decided a really good idea would be to go and buy a crappy old bus and need to raise £100,000 to turn it into a really nice wellbeing bus. And so we bought this double-decker bus, and it's called Wingby. No, sorry, that Welby is the first one. I really, really wished I hadn't given them both names that started with W, because I can never remember. But Welby we launched on the One Show at Homerton Hospital in Northeast London in February 2021. And then it was joined by its sister bus, Wingby, in July the following year at East Grinstead. And I managed to get down for that. That was the first time I'd stepped on a plane since I stopped flying. So I'd gone from March 2020 to July 2021 before I even went to an airport. And it was such an emotional flight, that first flight down, because I wasn't part of the furniture anymore. You know, this was my space, and suddenly I didn't feel like I belonged in it. The feedback we had from NHS staff was astonishing. So these buses, this is the upstairs of a bus, which is kitted out, as you can see, with raised glass roofs, massage chairs, tea and coffee making equipment, and foot massagers. And it's just a space that people could go to during their breaks and feel like they were being looked after. People would say, it feels like I've just been on holiday. And all it took was to say, can I serve you? You know, NHS staff are there to serve other people. And just the very fact of other people saying, can I serve you, was enough to give them a little bit of a boost throughout their working day. We had hundreds of messages. We actually had a tree that we got people to hang notes on to say what the lounge had meant to them. We've still got all those messages. And people have contacted us. Even now, people still contact me and say, thank you so much, for Project Wingman. And I was widely recognised for the charity, but so was the charity. And one of the messages I always like to say to people is that you need to celebrate your success and use it to empower other people. So it's never just about you. You know, it's about what we can do collectively to make a difference to the lives of other people. We were given a framed address by the Air League. I had an award from the British Women's Pilots Association. I met the Princess Royal when she came to visit the Forres, my local town. The Lord Lieutenant roped me in for that. And then I was nominated for a kindness award on the Lorraine show, which was very exciting, but it had a slight problem with it because I don't watch TV. So I was told that I was being interviewed for a newsreel that was going to be sent out the next week about Project Wingman and the work that we'd done from Hillingdon Hospital. So I went down there, turned up, and they'd got it all set up. And in burst this woman. I went, hi, I'm here to surprise you. And I was thinking, hi, who the are you? And it was a lady called RAeS, and she was really lovely. She's a presenter on the Lorraine show. And I had no idea that I was being surprised for this reason. And she said, yeah, we've been inviting you to this lunch on Monday. And I said, I'm really sorry, I can't go. I'm already going to a lunch on Monday. I'm going to the Women of the Year lunch. And that I'd been invited to. They said, yeah, that's with us. I said, no, it's not. I've got my own invitation. And I hadn't twigged that I was still going to the same lunch, but I was now on a different table. So that was a bit embarrassing. I didn't do that bit on the telly. But while I was there, I met some really amazing people, including Julia Etchingham and the lady from Ireland, whose name I can't remember. But it was really surreal looking around the room and seeing all these like famous women from TV shows and life and politics and stuff, and thinking that is so weird that I'm sitting having lunch with you all. And I got all the glory, but of course it was everybody else's hard work that was being recognised. So the final piece of that pie was that towards the end of 2020, I got an email from Downing Street to say I'd been nominated to receive an MBE. And I initially, when I opened the email, thought I was in trouble because I thought if the government's writing to me, I must have done something wrong. But that was an amazing thing to happen, because it was me that was awarded the MBE, but I do believe that it belongs to every single one of those 6,500 people that got out of bed every day and went and did something they didn't have to do for people that they didn't know. I think that's an astonishing human response to a crisis that I got all the glory for. So I do spend a lot of time also thanking aircrew for their part that they played in that. And obviously because of COVID, there was a bit of a delay. So I went down to Windsor actually in 2022 to collect that. So it's just before the Queen died, and it was then Prince Charles. My husband was very excited that he turned up in his Air Force uniform, which is the correct one, obviously, and because he was there in his uniform as well. I truly believe that there is no greater reward than the reward that you get from giving to others. And that was kind of part of the reason that I set up the charity. Partly I needed it for myself. I was a bit lost when my career had been kind of taken away from me. But in your deepest, darkest moments, to be able to give back to other people in the way that we were able to is an incredible gift, actually, to yourself as well as to others. So, I really believe that we need to keep doing these things, because actually things like Cubs and Scouts and football teams and things that happen all around us, they don't happen on their own. And it needs people to actually keep those things going. I wrote a book last year, if you want to know more about my story. Shameless plug, I did ask Christy if that would be all right. But I wrote a book last year telling you more about, I can't possibly squeeze into any presentation, everything that has happened over the last few years. But I wrote my book, Grounded. Originally, it was going to be called, the room full of men, you might not appreciate this quite so much, but the original title for the book was Folding My Wings, until one of my friends from EasyJet said, that sounds like a sanitary product advert. He said, I'm really glad you didn't call it that. So I wrote my book, and it's available here to buy if you'd like to buy a signed copy, or if you're watching online, then if you'd like one, then get in touch and I'll post it to you. And the next book that I'm writing is the Wingman story, because I believe it's a story that needs to be told. It's the story of 6,500 people that decided that they were going to follow somebody they didn't know and do something for people they didn't know that they didn't have to do. And every crewing department in the country wants to know what my secret is, because they can't get people to get out of bed and go and do things when they pay them. I now look at life through a different lens. The lens that I have of leadership from the flight deck is the lens of, I teach people about decision-making processes. So anybody in the room familiar with the DODA decision-making process? Anybody who flies? No? So this is what we use to make decisions at 37,000 feet. If you've got a very robust, strong process, you can make decisions that you can back up with facts anywhere. And so I talk about this a lot. I talk about the pilot path to success, which people quite like if they've never been a pilot but always wanted to. It's how to break big challenges down into small chunks, and how to lead and how to approach life, basically. So I've got my pilot path to success is something I like to share with businesses all over the country. And I talk about grounded leadership, which is based on humanity, humility, and humour. And I believe we're living in such turbulent times that we have never needed humanity in our lives more than we do now, and also in times that are so driven by AI and automation. So I believe that leaders who prioritise people do build teams that navigate change successfully, and boy, are we facing some change at the moment. I now do this for my job. I'm a professional speaker, which is a title I'm not that comfortable with, but it's what I do. And I spend a lot of time understanding that the value of everything that you're doing now will be seen looking back rather than the moment. And the reason I say that is because when I was in the thick of working on Project Wingman, I was working 18-hour days to set that charity up. And I kind of checked out of family life a bit while I was doing that, which is not something I'm proud of, but it's something I acknowledge was difficult for my family. But I poured so much of myself into the charity because it was work that needed to be done, and it made a difference to people's lives. And I think we need to be bold enough to keep throwing pebbles into the water and making those little changes in our own corners of the world, because it's the ripple effect of what we're doing that does all the other work for us. That's the end of my talk. I'll go back to the ripple effect, because I think that's the bit that I think is really important.